Hello everyone, I'm back with another video for you today, and today I have a full meta snapshot for Pool 2 for you. A bunch of decks that you can try if you're working your way up through the collection levels and you're in the early pools still. And I'll potentially talk about some options for later on how you can improve those decks as well. So with that being said, let's talk about the first deck here. We have Turn 6 Zoo, which in my opinion is probably the strongest deck in Pool 2. I've made a video on the channel already. If you're interested in this particular deck, you can go and check that out. But basically the idea here is you play a lot of one-cost cards, you buff them up with Ka-Zar, who buffs all your one-cost units, and Blue Marvel, who will buff any unit that you have on the board. So you're playing those two late-game cards, and you've got Bishop on turn 3, which gains a buff every time you play a card. So you're basically going to go Bishop, Ka-Zar, Blue Marvel on turn 6, play all your one-cost cards, and go crazy. And you should be invulnerable to Killmonger because, you know, the card that destroys all the one-costs, because you're able to play those one-drops at the end of the game, ideally with the opponent acting first. You can achieve that by having less points than them going into the last round. So I think this deck's very, very strong. It has a huge amount of points. It can react to what the opponent does. It does not really fall prey to something like Killmonger or any other tech card particularly. Enchantress can be a bit annoying maybe, but it's not too bad for the deck. So yeah, this is a very strong contender. You can upgrade it once you get into the later pools with certain cards like Zero perhaps, and Titania, maybe Blade. Is another... Oh, we already have Blade in this list. Never mind. You can even go the Killmonger route as well. You can play the Hood. You can play Nova. There's a lot of things you can do with this turn 6 Zoo to sort of tweak it to your preferred style. So, very strong deck and upgradable. You can also even play a version with Dracula and Red Skull later on, and Infernaut, and you basically can Dracula and then play all your one-drops and have a big 20-point Dracula at the end of the game. That's another good version of this sort of style of Zoo deck. And yeah, I might even have a video on that. If I do, it'll be, again, you'll be able to find it on the channel. Okay, so that's the first deck. Let's jump into the next. The next deck, which I think is S tier at Pool 2 sort of level, is Devil Dinosaur. So the idea with Devil Dinosaur is it's going to be boosted by 2 every time for every card you have in hand, I should say. The idea is then to play Moon Girl and duplicate your hand with Moon Girl, giving the Devil Dinosaur a ton of buffs, and ideally having 2 Devil Dinosaurs to play on turn 5 and turn 6 to quite effortlessly win 2 locations. Now the deck can run into a little bit of trouble with things like Shang-Chi and Enchantress from the opponent. That's why you run Armor. You could consider running Cosmo as well in this deck to try to disrupt the opponent's tech cards that they might have for your Devil Dinosaur. We have Chavez to make sure we draw this combination of Moon Girl, Devil Dinosaur more frequently. And we have some nice one-drop cards which will just support and yeah, synergize nicely with the deck, give you some early game. This deck's just very well-rounded. It's able to play on curve pretty much every time. And you're able to quite often have that very powerful Devil Dinosaur finish. So this is a deck that you'll see a lot of in Pool 2. It's very, very decent. You could even throw in a Killmonger if you're feeling risky and spicy and you want to armor your own one-drops and Killmonger the other Zoo decks and stuff. That's an option. But yeah, you can't really go wrong with Devil Dinosaur. This deck might not be so common, you know, seen from the opponents. It is essentially a value-based Storm deck. I think there's all manner of value-based Storm decks you can play in Pool 2 that are going to do very well. This is my particular take on that sort of an archetype. People do all sorts of things. They do even some Bamboozle with Heimdall. You know, you can play Heimdall and move all of your units around and confuse the opponent as to what you're doing. That's also a viable option with Storm and that sort of archetype. But here, the value that we're going for is going to be Guardians of the Galaxy, and particularly Gamora Rocket Raccoon on turn 6. That's the finisher for the deck. You're going to be able to storm a location and then predict where your opponent is playing and get a lot of on-reveal value. You're going to be able to perhaps move Vulture as well into the stormed location. Very strong deck, very versatile. We have Control Tool with Shang-Chi. We can swap that out for potentially Enchantress if you prefer. You can do all manner of things with the cards here. You can even play more early game if you feel like it. You can play Killmonger. There's a version of Killmonger that I've showcased on the channel as well, instead of Vulture, so you can check that video out if you're interested in some gameplay of that. But this deck is just very, very solid. It's able to control one location with Storm, and then control the other with the on-reveals. So very decent, versatile, powerful deck. I think it deserves S tier, although it's not going to be super popular necessarily in Pool 2. I think it deserves to be rated very highly. Okay, let's jump into the next deck. The final S tier deck that I have here is a classic Zoo build. So this is sort of, you're playing your 1-cost cards as you normally would on Curve. Ebony Maw is a card you can consider running and consider taking out. You know, try it out, see if it works for you. The idea is you can maybe play basically all 1-drops early game and get the Ebony Maw in a location, or maybe play 3 1-cost cards in a location and then Squirrel Girl for the final one to fill up that location. Ebony Maw's an interesting one. It's a little risky, so you can choose whether you play that or not. You might prefer Blade or something to synergize with Strong Guy. But yeah, here it's just basically a regular Zoo deck. You might improve this deck by later running Ultron, perhaps. If you're getting into the later pools, you can throw him in as a nice 6-cost card. You just play all your cards on Curve and then Ultron at the end. That can work quite well. So this is classic Zoo. This is maybe the more popular Zoo that you're going to encounter on the ladder. Probably deserves to be S tier, although arguably it is a little weaker against Killmonger than turn 6 Zoo, which we've also got you know, in the S tier rating. But if this is more your style, you don't really want to save all your power up for the end of the game, you'd rather just play on Curve and get good value, then you can consider this particular Zoo deck. Okay, heading into A tier. So these are decks that I think are pretty good and you can definitely win with, but they're not quite at the level of the S tier decks in terms of power and just ability to win games. So the first one we have here is Ongoing. Now, Ongoing is an archetype that's pretty decent even in Pool 3. You can upgrade it by taking out Onslaught and Colossus, and perhaps playing Daredevil and Destroyer in their place. That's quite a nice way to improve on this deck. But the idea is you play a lot of Ongoing cards with Spectrum, who can boost them all up by 2 at the end of the game. Alternatively, you can go for a big power play with Onslaught in a row, with Iron Man potentially, to really seal the deal. You've got Warpath, so you're basically focused on 2 locations usually. You have a cheeky Professor X as well, which can sometimes just win you a location for free if you throw it out on turn 5. It's better with Daredevil if you have that in Pool 3. But as a Pool 2 only deck, this is definitely a solid one. You don't necessarily have a great matchup into Zoo in particular, but you should have a decent amount of points into other stuff. So pretty good deck overall, and you can definitely upgrade it and make it even stronger when you get into Pool 3. The other deck that I put in A tier here is an Odin deck. Odin's quite popular in the lower pools, although it's not exactly the best, and it's rather predictable when you do face up against it. You kind of know that the Odin is coming at the end on turn 6. But the idea is to have some on-reveal effects that are quite powerful. You know, the Ironheart, the Wolfsbane, even a Rocket Raccoon in this particular version, which you can consider running or not. You've got, you know, Storm is a card that not all Odin decks will run. I think it's quite good because you can storm a location off, and then you can use White Tiger to potentially fill that up later, and then Odin the White Tiger, so you can get a nice win in the Storm location. But you should try whether or not you feel Storm is good. That's sort of a personal preference thing. Otherwise, you want to do White Tiger, Ironheart in the same location, and then Odin them for a very powerful finisher. This deck can be improved with Wong later for even more on-reveal value. You can throw in Gambit to destroy the opponent's cards. There's certain things you can do with on-reveal as you go into Pool 3. But at Pool 2 level, it's a pretty solid deck. It's a little predictable and a little easy to defeat in certain circumstances, but I think it is worthy of the A tier slot. So the final A tier deck that we have here is Jubilee Infinite Shenanigans. I think this deck's pretty strong. It has sort of a very high power ceiling. You can Jubilee to pull out a random card from your deck, so you know you're trying to hit those 5 and 6 cost cards. Maybe you pull a Hulk and you get a 13 for 4. Very, very strong. You then want to Odin the Jubilee perhaps to get even more power in that row if it's contested. The one downside to this deck is it's going to often put a lot of points in one particular location and might struggle to get more in another if you are doing the Odin into Jubilee, for example, game plan. But I think it has a very high, you know, potential power level, and yeah, it's a little inconsistent. You need to draw the Jubilee, but even when you don't, you can still play your cards on curve. Sunspot, Armor, fantastic. Jessica Jones and whatnot. And potentially you can even skip turn 5 to play that 20-point Infernaut. That is certainly an option with this deck. So the final A tier, yeah, gets a thumbs up from me. So in the B tier, I'm putting Movement. I don't think Movement is too strong in a Pool 2 or really at all. It's quite exploitable. You can predict the Heimdall coming on turn 6 to move all of the units to the left. Now, of course, you can get a lot of points with it, don't get me wrong. You know, Craven, Vulture, Multiple Man, they can be worth a lot of points, but the deck's somewhat exploitable because it generally struggles to have a lot of strength in the right location. You've got Vision there to maybe help with that and move him over there after your... to be honest, it doesn't even work too well because Heimdall basically always just moves everything left. So this deck, if your opponent knows what they're doing, it's going to struggle a bit, but the idea is you can maybe make a big Multiple Man with Forge and Hulkbuster, and then you can go crazy with Doctor Strange, with Heimdall, moving those multiple men, copying them, and getting a lot of value. So I think it's an okay deck. There's a lot of synergy within this deck, but yeah, it's something that really can be quite easily countered if the opponent knows what they're doing, I think. And you rely on drawing all of those combo pieces at the right time in order to get it flowing nicely. So yeah, not a huge fan of Movement in Pool 2. You can upgrade it with Human Torch later, potentially with Cloak, and cards like this. Sorry, Dagger. Cloak is the one we already have. Dagger, it's Cloak and Dagger. I always get that mixed up. There are a couple of cards you can introduce to make Movement a bit stronger, but not an archetype that I think is that great these days. That might change in the future. Who knows, when you're watching this, it might actually be quite strong, but for now I'm putting it in B tier. Let's go to the next deck. So next in C tier, we have sort of a versatile, tech-focused Destroy deck. I don't think Destroy as an archetype is very good until you're actually, you know, playing certain cards like Death, which synergizes when all your guys are destroyed, things like that. Potentially Wave to work well with that. So you need some later pool cards to really make the Destroy archetype properly functional. But, you know, we're playing a few decent ones like Bucky Barnes and Angel and stuff. You can destroy your units and then try to destroy the opponent's units with Killmonger, Shang-Chi. You've got some control tools, so this deck can definitely win if those line up for you and you can deal with what your opponent is doing. But I wouldn't say this is the best deck ever, and it might just lack points a little bit without a proper finisher to speak of, other than these sort of little destroy value interactions that we have. So Destroy, not super good archetype. People will play it. The bots will probably play it a lot as well. But yeah, not thinking that is particularly strong at this sort of level. And finally, also in C tier, we have a discard deck here for you. Now discard, also an archetype that really doesn't work super well, I think, until you have some of the Pool 3 cards like Hela, Hellcow, and Ghost Rider, stuff like that. Here we're just going to rely on Blade, Lady Sif, and Swordmaster to discard things. We want to discard Apocalypse, and ideally Swarm perhaps. But yeah, this deck's a little clunky. You want to try to empty your hand a bit so you can hit the good targets with your discards, but that's sometimes going to be a bit of a problem, a bit difficult to do. You might consider cutting Iron Man. I'm not sure about that card in this deck. You could play a different card, maybe another 1-drop, so that you can empty your hand more easily and avoid discarding that Iron Man. But yeah, discard, a bit of an inconsistent and rather predictable archetype, I think, at Pool 2, because, you know, the opponent can see the Swarm coming, they can see the Apocalypse coming, so if you're up against someone decent at the game, then they're going to quite easily exploit you and beat you a lot of the time. Not to mention, you're often going to just discard good cards from your hand and end up feeling very sad that you lost value. So, bit of an inconsistent one and not great for Pool 2. I'm going to put it in C tier. So guys, that does it for my little Pool 2 snapshot for you. Some of the great decks that you can use to climb, some of the weaker ones that you might see, or similar things that people might be playing on the ladder. There are definitely some archetypes that improve over time with more cards and later pools of them. And do subscribe for more content. Go and watch the video that is being shown over here. Go and watch that. I'm not sure what it is, but it's probably a good one. You should probably go watch that if you've got nothing else to do. With that being said, guys, thanks a lot for watching, and do subscribe for more, as I already said. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.